Well, welcome everybody to the Honours Seminars for the mid-year people, 2022. So we'll start with, I don't know how do I go to the next slide? Where's the pointer? There we go. Sorry guys, technical. Oh yeah, you have to go there, okay. Right, we will start with an acknowledgement of country, and then I'll introduce some stuff and then we'll begin. Today we're meeting on Lutruwita Aboriginal land, sea and waterways, and online in many other locations across Australia. I acknowledge with deep respect the traditional owners of this land, the Muwinina people on which we meet today, and the First Nations peoples of the land on which people online are meeting. The Muwinina people belong to the oldest continuing culture in the world. They cared and protected country for thousands of years. They knew this land, they lived on the land, and they died on these lands, and I honour them. For the Muwinina people, the area around Nipaluna was their country, and they called Mount Wellington Kunyani. I acknowledge that it is a privilege to stand on country and to walk in the footsteps of those before us. Beneath the mountain, among the gums and waterways that continue to run through the veins of the Tasmanian Aboriginal community. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and to the many Aboriginal people that did not make elder status, and to the Tasmanian Aboriginal community that continue to care for country. I recognise a history of truth which acknowledges the impacts of invasion and colonisation upon Aboriginal people, resulting in the forceful removal from their lands. Our island is deeply unique, with spectacular landscapes, with our cities and towns surrounded by bushland, wilderness, mountain ranges and beaches. I stand for a future that profoundly respects and acknowledges Aboriginal perspectives, culture, language and history, and a continued effort for the fight for Aboriginal justice and rights, paving the way for a strong future. So today, welcome to the students who are presenting, welcome to industry partners, welcome to representatives from the Ag Institute, welcome staff, and welcome loved ones. It's such a privilege always to be the person who coordinates the honours programme. It's always ultimately a culmination of the students' journey throughout our degrees. And there's not necessarily too much joy going around right now. And this is a very joyful day always. So I hope that you enjoy it all. It's also a privilege for me to get to read the acknowledgements in each of the theses as I get them through Milo. And I know that this is not your journey alone as a student, that you have families and loved ones who have helped you to get here. So we acknowledge that as teachers, and we're really glad that some of you can join us today. Presentations will be 12 minutes long. They're timed by Alicia, and she is strict. And you'll have 5 minutes for questions at the end of each presentation. In terms of housekeeping, for people who are actually in the room, if there's a fire, you have to leave, and you have to leave through these exits, and then we will congregate basically on top of the herbarium. So just follow us, but go towards the light. Please turn your mobiles and your laptops to silent. There's nothing more distracting than something going off during a presentation, particularly if you're not used to doing them all the time. Also, if you need to leave, that's completely fine, but please wait until the end of a presentation. Also at the end, when we have questions, if you're in the room, if you can raise your hand and we'll pick you. And if you're online, then please put your questions in the chat, and Deepa will sort of read them out, and then the students can answer them for you. If we don't get to your question, if there's so many questions, then don't worry, we'll note down who it is. We'll make sure that the students get back to you. And if you're watching online, I don't think you can be unmuted, but just in case you can, please mute your microphone so we don't hear your dog or whatever in the background. So without further ado, I guess we'll have, well, yes, we were going to have the Ag Institute, but do you mind if we have that at the end? Is that okay? And or do you want to come up and put it on now? Okay, cool. Well, we'll have Conrad. So Conrad Chung is from the Ag Institute. And as you may or may not know, these presentations will be recorded, and then the Ag Institute will rewatch them in about 6 months' time, whatever it is. And then they will include them when they are looking for giving the awards. And the person who wins first prize goes and represents Tasmania at the National Ag Institute Seminar Awards. So it's a reasonably big deal. But Conrad's going to come and speak a little bit about the Ag Institute. Have you got it on a memory stick?
Yes, sure.
Perfect. Bear with us. Conrad gets stuck in traffic. You pop it in, I think there. Might be it.
Yeah.
You might have to put that now. Cool. We'll be with you shortly, guys.
Okay.
Take it away, Conrad.
Right. Thanks, Beth. And thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of the Ag Institute. My name's Conrad Chung, and I'm with the Tasmanian branch of the Ag Institute. Firstly, just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians, the Mawina and the Palawa people of the land on which we gather today, and pay respect to the elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Just to describe, or why would you want to become part of the Ag Institute? The Ag Institute is a networking facility, and it's for those who are passionate about the industry. There's many reasons why. I've joined when I was an undergraduate here at UTAS, and I joined because I wanted to meet people and to find out what else is going within the ag industry. Networking, I can't overemphasize how important it is. It will help you choose your career or direction pathway wherever you want to go. It's not only whether you want to go into research, consulting, agronomy, or agribusiness. There's several pathways. Yep. So there are, as I said, there are several pathways, and the Ag Institute will hopefully facilitate whoever you want to meet or see, or even attend a networking event. So what are we offering in terms of membership for you? I'm not going to go through all of these. There is a website you can look up, but the Ag Institute will provide a standard of ethics and professional development for you as a person. For those who are branching out in the consultancy world, the Ag Institute is actually a professional body. A professional body for those who are applying for government grants and organisations such as, because they require you as a person to become part of a professional body, just like the accounting people and the law people. This is an agricultural institute. There are a range of different fees or standards of membership, but the one I just specifically want to highlight to you is mainly the undergraduates and postgraduate. As you can see, if you're an undergraduate, it's free. It's not going to cost you anything to join. And as a postgraduate, you can see that it's a discounted rate. So for those who are in your third and fourth years, even if you are first and second years, consider joining up. It is really worthwhile. You also get newsletters, get to go to events, and we also, if people are interested in running an ethics course as well. The other thing I just want to mention quickly to the undergraduates, we also run a mentoring program. The people that would join up would be with other members within the industry. And it's also for students to get to know people within the industry, maybe spend some time with them, and help you to decide, if that's a career pathway you want to go. But the other benefit is too that if there is a particular pathway you want to go, we ourselves would know someone else who you can talk to. I just want to give an example where people who have taken jobs on, I've heard recently, where they're not really happy or wasn't really expecting those particular jobs that they're doing now. So with networking, at least you get a bit of an idea what's involved, whichever particular area you want to go into. So as I said, we look at mentees can be undergraduates, honours students, first, second year, even postgraduates. The mentor they're looking after the students obviously would be governed by a set of guidelines. So it's not a as I say, unregulated type program. So if you're not a member, please consider joining up. It's worthwhile. There's the website links, aginstitute.com.au. And thank you for letting me speak.
Thanks very much, Conrad. Is everything all right online? Ah, cool. Yeah. You want to do that? Thanks for those who are online. It's we're in a slightly different room than we have been in the last few years. And little quirks. We're getting to the juicy bits that you've come for, so don't worry. Okay, well, without further ado, our first seminar today is from Lucy Cooper. She's looking at assessing land use and social change associated with irrigation development. So I know this is a hot topic that lots of people are interested in, so I'm really excited. And when you're ready, Lucy, okay, take it away.
All righty. Well, good afternoon. My honours project, as Beth said, is assessing land use change and social change associated with irrigation development. So why this project? Water presents a lot of opportunity in Tasmania. Some seek it to gain reliability, others a chance to grow their operation. Some claim irrigation has wider reaching benefits, so it can not only benefit farmers, but also the community. Irrigation leads to growth. It's often said that irrigation will drive a shift to a higher value enterprise. And the main selling point is that irrigation is linked to the future. Investment in irrigation in Tasmania is underpinned by that goal to reach a $10 billion farm gate value by the year 2050. So with all of this in mind, I was curious to find out how and if these outcomes were occurring. So what does the literature say about irrigation? Many talk about enabling new possibilities, adapting to climate change, increase in agricultural outcomes, higher yields, efficiencies. It's often discussed in engineering or economic terms. And a less studied aspect is how the social side of irrigation and how water may change society and the relationship between society and water is used. And this research, my research, looks at the social side of irrigation, which is a relative gap in the literature. What we often see is that the social processes of change are considered maybe in the justification of the scheme, but then they're not followed up on until they become a problem later. That social change is triggered by irrigation is often understudied, and I was keen to explore that further, not just looking at the data or the facts, but speaking to the people who live through that every single day. So in Tasmania, the Australian government has invested in the development of several new irrigation schemes. The scheme used as a case study for my research was the Swan Valley irrigation scheme. It spans the townships of Cranbrook and Swansea, and the region has a notoriously variable climate, prolonged periods of drought followed by a huge dumping of rain, and that makes irrigation highly important in the region. Interestingly enough, what makes this scheme quite unique is that from its operation in 2018, for the first 2 years of operation, it didn't actually fill to capacity because it was such low rainfall in the area. So in the Swan Valley, I asked these two questions. How does a region change with irrigation development? What are those patterns in land use change? What is the land used for? What are the enterprises, the yields, and how are they linked to irrigation development in the region? I also asked, how does a community change with irrigation development? What are those patterns in social change? How do farmers and farms with access to irrigation shift? Do they change their enterprises? Do they change the way they manage their farms? Do they employ more people? So to answer the first research question, I chose a time frame which was from 2015 to 2020, and that spans the introduction of the new scheme, so pre and post development. I chose to select images from the growing region itself. So looking at an image that was low cloud cover, really easy to see, and I selected one for each year, and using ArcMap, I clipped those images. In ArcMap, I ran supervised classification after determining the key land use types. So things like fallow, irrigated pasture, native forest, etc. I then validated that data with national map to ensure that on those exact dates and times, the correct land use type had been picked up in ArcMap. And then that data from ArcMap was used to create maps. And then from the attribute table, the change in area under each land use classification type was estimated. To answer the second research question, 9 participants were selected for interviews. They included farmers who were signed onto and not onto the scheme, and other stakeholders, so such as the agency, government, and consultants. And as we can see up there, there was 9 in total. Interview questions, they were based off the research questions, and then the questions were tailored to fit the role of each interviewee. And then I held the interviews in person and over the phone. They ranged from about 20 to 40 minutes, and they were in a semi-structured style. So just to allow for conversation to flow and just for any follow-up questions that may arise. I then assessed those interviews. So they were transcribed and codes were used for the interviewees to protect their identity. And then using NVivo software, the interviews were coded to the key themes which had emerged. So here are some of the results shown here. I'm hoping that this little, yeah. And so we have 2 of the 6 of the maps that were created. And so we have the beginning and the end of the time frame that I had selected. So we see some change, but it's really minimal. As we can see that native forest and that grassland and non-irrigated pasture, it really doesn't change across the 2 years. For people in the room, my face is covering it, but from this irrigated section, I don't know if I can move it. So from this woody irrigated here and what you might see over here, this is actually a lot more area covered than, thank you, Nick, than here. So it's not what may have been expected. And same here, higher woody irrigated, which includes like tree crops and irrigated pasture. And over here, it isn't as much. And so, here, these are charts show the change in the land use type across the 6 growing regions. So interestingly, the woody irrigated, so this light green here, and the pasture, that darker green there, if we compare from the very start to the end down here, that is actually a lot more than when the scheme had been introduced and had been in operation. So the expectation was that this non-irrigated pasture in this yellow here, that area would actually decrease to allow for a higher value enterprise such as irrigated pasture. But as you can see very clearly, that did not occur. So change from the point of scheme implementation was not significant. And there are several reasons for this, and the interviews revealed some of them. So from the interview data, five themes emerged. Climate change was a major driver as motivation, given that feast and famine nature of the region. I asked farmers about their motivation and what led them to purchase water or not to. For many, the decision to sign on to the scheme was to that idea of reliable water and a chance to change or expand their operation. And that chance to change or expand their enterprise was another key theme. For many, irrigation water allowed them to shift the farm from something like pasture, grazing pasture, to a higher value operation, but it wasn't for all. And it was really just dependent on the individual, as some farmers had already shifted their operation, let's say from grazing to vineyards prior to the scheme implementation. Many farmers said that the irrigation did help them to get that security of water, but not necessarily the expansion. Size and costs really strongly related to each other. So farmers felt that the area the scheme covered and the amount of water that was allocated was a limiting factor to their operation. They felt that the amount of water only reflected that initial demand and not the entire, not their future desires, essentially. Other stakeholders I spoke to had a very different view on this. They justified the size and the cost because it was meeting the current demand and it was conservative to reduce any risk of failure. And employment was again dependent on the individual. For those who shifted from dry land to irrigation, they did require more staff because it was more labour intensive. But others felt because they'd only gained security, it didn't warrant any extra need for staff. So this raises a few questions worth discussing. What is the right price for a scheme? The size of the dam changes the impact on the region, because the larger the dam, the more dramatic the effect on the landscape. Similarly, a large-scale irrigation development can also increase the significance of the impact on the economy. And what is the right price for an irrigation scheme? How much should an agency charge for water? Economics demands that there should be cost recovery, but if the price is too high, how many farmers cannot participate? Some are afraid to invest in large sums and commit for 100 years. And research has shown that high prices do not necessarily drive efficiency for water savings. Is there a sweet spot where the agency can afford to build and manage the scheme and also fit in with farmers' operations, a price that allows more people to access water? And how do we not lock ourselves into the present? How do we remain flexible and plan for the future? Farmers agreed that in 2018, the water allocation did meet the required demand. However, they did felt that it did not reflect the desire for many farmers to embark on future expansion. And in most points of discussion around price, size, enterprise change, there were two distinct views, that of the agencies and that of the farmers, which leads me to conclude collaboration is needed. What is evident from this research is that there is a need to have ongoing discussions, not just to discuss with farmers before the scheme is implemented and not follow up. It is not enough that farmers are just consulted in that time. The research shows there is a clear gap in perceptions as a result of a lack of collaboration. And avoiding lock-in. Overwhelmingly, the key limiting factor was the fact that there was a 100-year purchase period, which I found limits the growth of the region. by only meeting the water demand the first year of operation. This indicates a limited space to be flexible as the future unfolds. We know the climate is variable in this region. We know that's only going to become more variable with climate change, but we do know we will be eating food in 100 years, and in this region's case, wine. So of course, we know we'll need to produce. So could a decreased buy-in period allow for that flexibility, but also for young people to enter into that region and invest in water? And some possible next steps. Adoption. The framework of this study and the methodology was created so it can be applied to any irrigation scheme in Tasmania and Australia. There's also that chance to build upon. We can allow for more in-depth analysis in this study. And follow-up. This assessment was only conducted 4 years after the irrigation was implemented in 2018. And with a 100-year buy-in purchase period, it really needs to be followed up upon, and so we can track that change over that time. And to finish, I'd like to make some acknowledgements. So to my supervisors, so Deepa Kumar, who has been with me every step of the way, helped me form this study, and her patience with the constant Zoom meetings and everything. And Lindsay Mitchell from Enrich, he came in at the end to really help fill that gap with the remote sensing. He's been incredibly invaluable. Anyone who participated in my interviews, the university, Beth, your work doesn't go unnoticed. Thank you for everything you do. My work, ABC Rural, they've been incredible supporters, and of course my family as well. Thank you for that. And I'd like to open the floor to questions now.
That was awesome. Thanks, Lucy. Yeah, sorry, I'm a bit smaller than you. So is there any questions in the room? John?
That was a really good presentation. Thank you very much. I'm just wondering, with something like this, I guess that one of the challenges is getting the right scale of time after things happen to work out with the second effect. So in the future, do you think the irrigation scheme will continue to change land use in there, but beyond the time of this?
So for the purposes of people online, what John's asking is, does Lucy think that the land use change will continue to change over the next 96 years or whatever the rest of the time is?
I think from that perspective of the people in the region, they believe that it's that 100 years that they really felt was limiting. If it was, let's say, a 50-year buy-in, then they would definitely say, yep, change will happen. It's just that we got off to a rocky start. But you know what, in 50 years' time, all the water licenses will be renewed, new people can enter the region. But the fact that they all felt, even though it's only after 4 years, that they could only provide that security, I don't think significant change will occur in that region. I think that those who maybe wanted to do that little bit of a shift have already done that, even if the remote sensing data doesn't necessarily show that. It's more just from talking to people on the ground saying, we've got the things in place to open it up. And to be honest, if people wanted to invest in that irrigation and dams and stuff, and they can't buy in those 100 years, those who didn't sign on to the scheme, they're already looking at their own options to do that. So to conclude that answer, I would say no significant change. No, I do not believe so.
Thanks, Lucy. Is there anything online, Deepa?
Yeah.
Not yet.
That's okay.
Anybody else got any? Oh yeah, sorry, Caroline.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks for the presentation. If I was a policy maker in the water governance and management space, what recommendations would you make to me?
Okay, so I would recommend a once a year meetup. So essentially, you bring in people involved with enrich, you bring in people involved with the agency, and you invite landholders in the area to come, and you have a group meeting to discuss issues that have raised, what's going right, what's going wrong. There was a lot of things that farmers felt, given that it was anonymous, that they could tell me about issues that had occurred in the scheme. I haven't included them in the interview, but they were issues that they felt they didn't have an avenue to raise, and that there was no chance to contact. There was people on the ground, but nothing was being done. And until I spoke to all of that range of farmers in the region, they realized they all had the same issues. It's just that they hadn't voiced them. in that kind of setting. So I would recommend that once a year discussion during the irrigation season or just past it to have a bit of a reflection and a check-in. So then everyone hears each other's, because the division between the two, the agency and the stakeholders and the farmers, was just incredible. The fact that everything the farmers said, the agency and the stakeholders said, was completely different. It was just phenomenal to see that change. And then one other thing that I would probably say is to revise that 100-year purchase period. Now, the agency say that's for to ensure the longevity and to ensure that their, water isn't being purchased. But given that water sold out 100% very early on when it was released, and from everyone I've spoken to and from the data itself, they really would not have a case of people not wanting to purchase water in 50 years' time. It would actually allow more people to come into that region and have a bit of that stake of the water pie, as I like to say.
What about the infrastructure? They're not particularly flexible.
No, and this is one of those other questions that was raised, is that talking about locking in, well, we can talk about that socially, but how do you make engineering and such a stringent structure flexible? And I suppose what we've looked at is that they've got the one dam and the one pump station. There is potential, there are discussions around the potential for a second dam on another property that could be introduced. So it's not necessarily putting that dam down and building a bigger one. It's just looking whether there's another case, because where they've geographically used Melrose Dam, they've had to put a pump in because it's lower than the rest of the farmland. So they're pumping it out. But farmers do believe in the valley that you can do it with the use of gravity and not have to have those extra pumping costs as well. But it's not something that I've mapped out, or that's all anecdotal.
Well, I think we've got one question online.
Yes. From Yana. Say thanks for your presentation, Lucy. Nicely done. Just wondering how representative you think the case is compared to other irrigation schemes.
Excellent question. And this is something that we've discussed about a lot, because this scheme had that unique situation where it didn't fill for the first 2 years. And it's almost what drew us towards it, was to understand what that kind of social impact would mean. I mean, we all know that drought can be with you for a very long time. So when you finally get irrigation water and you can't actually pump as much as you wish, how does that add on to it? In terms of the rest of Tasmania, I mean, all irrigation schemes are put in areas where there are dry rainfall, but they haven't necessarily been in the same case where they haven't filled in those first 2 years. And this is something about adding on to and going into that in-depth more analysis, is adding another scheme, adopting this methodology to another scheme. I can't say that it is entirely representative of every scheme in Tasmania, because it had that unique start. So I think that if you had a look at somewhere in the Midlands or further up in the Northwest, we'd see some very different situations. But it's, from this point, it's not hard to see that and to adopt that methodology anymore. And especially given that this has only been 4 years in operation. So in the sense of irrigation, Tasmania, or if you look at the Southeast scheme or something, which is going through different phases, it's new. So there's opportunity to assess a broader time frame across all of irrigation in Tasmania.
Thanks very much, Lucy. We'll give her another round of applause. Well, we will change this so that we've got the next one. Oh, I don't want to change the name of this. I want to just put it on. There we go. So next up, last but not least, oh, how do I do this? I'm technically challenged. There we go. It's all right, Max all over it. Perfect. Okay, so I guess the next one we've got quite different, but that's what we like, a bit of variety. So Matilda's been investigating the acute and chronic impacts of tail docking methods on the productivity of merino and terminal crossbred lambs. And I'll go and sit down and I'll let you talk away.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. present here and online. Yes, as Beth mentioned, my seminar is investigating the acute and chronic impacts of tail docking method on the productivity of merino and crossbred, terminal crossbred lambs. Oh yeah. So before I sort of get into it, I'd like to just gloss over a few terms that I refer to throughout this presentation. So landmarking, for those who are not familiar with it, is a process that should be undertaken when lambs are 2 to 12 weeks of age, and generally involves the application of vaccinations, ear tagging and ear marking for identification, castration and tail docking. And for enterprises that rely on mulesing as a method of fly strike prevention, this is also done at landmarking. Tail docking is the removal of the tail at the third palpable joint or below, and is also considered a valuable method of fly strike prevention. The two most common methods used in Australia are the gas knife and illustrator rubber rings. The gas knife is it's designed as a gas-heated docking anvil scissor iron thing that severs the tail through cautery, and the illustrator rubber rings, are designed to cut off the circulation to the tail, leading to necrosis and then the complete detachment of the tail. Then weaning is a process that occurs when lambs are 12 to 14 weeks of age, and this time frame is pretty key in terms of getting ewes back in production for joining the following year. So I anecdotally had a conversation with a wool grower, or actually a fat lamb producer, and they said to me, oh, while after a lamb has had a ring put on their tail and before the tail drops off, they're not putting on weight, they're fighting an infection, which I don't know if that was an old wives' tale, but something that they felt passionately about, and thus used the gas knife method. But it got me thinking, is there a difference between docking methods? Does it have an impact on production, and how long does that impact last? And as a result, is there one method that is preferable in terms of production? So this project was run on 2 neighbouring properties, Myrtlewood and Vaucluse, and involved 4 groups of lambs. Only ewe lambs could be used, were used on in this project, as all male lambs on both properties were castrated at landmarking. Since this project was investigating the effects of tail docking, male lambs were not included, as the effects of tail docking may have been masked by the method of castration. We utilised a behavioural analysis which investigated the impacts of tail docking method immediately after the procedure, and we used a weight analysis which investigated the longer term impacts of tail docking for up to 6 months after the procedure. So to perform this behaviour analysis, we installed cameras in and around the sheep yards during landmarking, and it captured footage of the lambs being reunited with their dams in the yards. Using the cameras just allowed me to watch the footage back at a time that suited me, and it meant that I could get footage, or I could collect data while we were still landmarking the lambs as they went. Also, due to the large number of lambs in the group 2 lambs and groups 3 and 4 being marked in a large paddock, it was quite difficult to see them on camera, so we just used the group 1 lambs in this analysis. So I devised a behaviour ethogram, which I just described these 8 states and events which I expected to observe in lambs after tail docking. The behaviour assessments, I began after 30% of the lambs had made it to the yards and were reunited with their mothers. and then continued the assessments every 30 seconds for 5 seconds until the first wether lamb, so first male lamb, had entered the yard. At each analysis point, the number of lambs in each treatment group within the field of view were counted up, and we recorded the number of lambs displaying the different behaviours. I then was able to use, using SPSS, we analysed the data and found that it was normally distributed, and were able to analyse using a linear mixed model with treatment as a fixed effect and mob as a random effect. So this was sort of the behaviour data that we generated. I just want to make note, so the first two groups, which is the purple and blue, that went through the yards, they had their dams in the yards waiting for them upon their return. However, the red-green group, they there was a bit of a mix-up, and they actually didn't go back in with their dams, but we still analysed the data. They just obviously wouldn't have been able to suckle, so that's hence why there's sort of a few behaviours that are a bit funny up the top there. But anyway, aside from that, we can see that generally there's a greater diversity of behaviours elicited by lambs that have been docked using the ring, with the lateral lying and abnormal walking only elicited by lambs docked using the rings. And there's also, we can see quite a significant, well, seemingly significant increase in abnormal standing among the gas knife lambs. So when we analysed the data, we found that there's a significant effect of treatment on the amount of time spent abnormally walking. So lambs docked using the rubber rings spent more time walking with an unusual gait. There was a tendency, there was a tendency for treatment to affect the amount of time lambs spent moving their tails, so lifting and wiggling their tails, standing abnormally, suckling and lying laterally with their legs extended. Lambs docked using the rubber rings tended to spend more time moving their tail, suckling and lying in a lateral position, while the gas knife lambs spent more time, tended to spend more time standing abnormally. There was no significant effective treatment on turning and looking at their fore and turning to their hindquarters. So moving on to the weight analysis, all lambs were weighed 3 times, so once at lamb marking, once halfway between lamb marking and weaning, and then at weaning. And then the Myrtlewood lambs, we were able to weigh them and handle them more frequently. So we actually weighed them again 4 weeks after weaning and 8 weeks after weaning. So I used multiple linear regression to determine if the change of weight between 2 consecutive weighings and total change in weight from lamb marking to a particular weighing was significantly impacted by docking method. So looking at the group 1 lambs, which are the stud mob of merino lambs, we determined that there was a significant impact on of treatment on weight gain from lamb marking to the first weighing, as well as second weighing, as well as from the second weighing to the weaning. Beyond weaning, we didn't find any significant effects of treatment. And yeah, so in this first weighing section, of weighing period, the lambs that were docked using a rubber ring gained 0.67 kilograms more than the gas knife lambs, and then again between the second and weaning weighing events, they actually gained a further 970 grams, so 0.97 kilos. There was also a significant effective treatment on the total weight gained right through to the 4th weighing event. So this is looking at weight gain from lamb marking right through. So up to weaning, the ringed lambs had gained a total of 1.64 kilos more than the gas knife lambs. And at the fifth weighing, they had gained a total of 1.57 kilos more than gas knife lambs. There was, no, you can't see it behind the, my head, but there was no significant effect beyond the fourth weighing. So then that was quite promising. But going forward, looking at the weight data from group 2, so another mob of merino lambs, we didn't detect a significant difference in any of the weighing results. And likewise for group 3, so this group had less weighing events. But interestingly, for group 4, there was a significant effect of treatment on weight gain between lamb marking and the second weighing, as well as from marking right through to weaning. So the ring lambs gained a total of 0.5 kilograms less than the gas knife lamb. So in group 1, we had our ringed lambs gaining more, but in this group, we had our gas knife lambs gaining significantly more. So what can we conclude from that? Well, essentially neither docking method is better or worse than the other in terms of productivity. Docking method does not seem to be significantly impacted beyond weaning. So in terms of production, no one's, well, a lot of people, are weaning lambs and getting rid of them after weaning. So the effects of that tail docking method doesn't seem to be, it does not seem to have an impact beyond weaning. And we do seem to have significant different behaviours elicited at or just after lamb marking. So in terms of studying this further, perhaps looking, we did actually find I didn't include it because I knew I was going to run out of time. There was a correlation between tail width and weight at lamb marking, but also weight gain throughout the project. So it'd be interesting to research and look into how tail width correlates to weight gain. My supervisors have been super duper, and many Zoom meetings every week. I worked with 3 different lamb marking crews to ensure that the lambs were all getting their right treatment. So I thank them wholeheartedly, and also the unsung heroes, Herbert, Wallace, Possum and Gus, who are the work dogs. So they were,
That's great. Thank you so much. Has anybody got any questions from the room? Go for it, Nigel.
With your results, you were looking at do you think that was it because of introduction of such a stressful event that when you were introduced back that present, that you were able to therefore feeling better, suffering from less stress, therefore
well, it's quite, I find it hard to say because it was only one group out of actually all of the lambs that didn't immediately have their dams with them, but they did essentially as soon as we went outside and realised that they didn't have their dams, they were put with them. So I don't think I can't exactly say whether there was an effect of their dams being present or not on their weight gain. I would potentially say not, in terms of past studies had looked at the effect of being away from their mothers, and obviously, like, recommendations are that they are away for as short amount of time as possible. But yeah, I don't think that factor would have influenced their weight gain. That sort of answers your question.
Alicia.
Thanks very much for the presentation. It's totally not my area, but so I'm going to ask a question that is probably maybe, I'm not sure, because sort of relative. I mean, there wasn't much difference between the groups, couple of groups, but the difference was about kilograms in the end.
Yeah.
I know it wasn't long term. In terms of short term, do you think farmers may be more like to go, you know, they did have an impact? I mean, you're going to share with farmers how that actually interpret it. It sounds like a significant amount. Interesting to know.
Yeah, so in running the multiple linear regressions, we included their initial weight, twin status, and treatment as, and tail width was an interesting factor that we included in that that multiple linear regression. So of those weights were considering their initial weight. I think many farmers will actually be quite surprised to find that there is no difference. Well, maybe not a lot of them, but this one particular one. And I think, yeah, I think even if there is a difference, like, that's still a result in itself, you know, say that, well, actually either method is like, yeah, not better or worse, but there is that difference in the behaviour analysis. So, you know, I guess it's maybe moving with one that has less impact on lands portraying abnormal behaviours, but not seen in pain-free lands. A good question, thank you.
Do you have a question, John?
Yeah. So that's a really good presentation. Apologies, you mentioned this already, but from a welfare perspective, is one method preferred or recommended over the other?
So the two methods that I investigated are the two recommended methods in Australia. There is another method which is just using a cold knife, which is like the least, well, essentially the third down. It's not recommended in that the cortisol measure levels seem to extend quite beyond those the other two methods in previous studies. Sorry, I should have.
Just wondering, would you get a different result if you use different breeds of sheep?
So I tried to cover that basis in that we were using the terminal crossbreds and the merinos. I wouldn't think that there would be much different, except in that crossbreds generally have thicker tails, and whether the fact that their tails are significantly thicker, perhaps, you know, those lambs that had the rings, they were feeling it a bit more, and hence didn't put on as much weight as the gas knife ones, and that's why they sort of went ahead. Whereas the merinos have slightly smaller tails, and yeah, perhaps not feeling the effects of the ring group. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure if breed would be that significant, but it would be interesting to run it again, perhaps with a larger array of sheep breeds.
So I've got one last question. I guess, and perhaps you sort of answered this before, but in terms of implications from this, in terms of welfare, are there recommendations that you can now give to farmers about which one might be better if they're worried about welfare?
Yeah, so I think there's so as part of, obviously I couldn't present all my data, but I did have I did look into tail scoring and looking at how quickly tails are healing after either procedure, And there's quite a lot of studies, quite a lot of previous work that has gone into looking at arthritis and its prevalence in lambs, particularly that have short dock tails, so shorter than the third palpable joint. And they've found that essentially shorter tails take longer to heal, and because they take longer, there's more opportunity for bacteria to get in. So I did find that the ringtails, because, well, they seem to not heal as quickly, but I think that's because essentially the tail was there and covering the wound, and then it dropped off. So by the time I was measuring it, it had only just dropped off, and hence, looked like it had been exposed for all the time, but in fact it hadn't. I think, yeah, but potentially the gas knife would create issues for infection sort of down the track, but no, I haven't sort of done enough to give you solid answers there, Beth, sorry.
That's all right.
But
That's science.
I'll get back to you.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Well done, Matilda. Oh, well, that concludes us for this this time. Join us again in October. Thanks very much for coming in person or online. Thanks very much for anybody who helped me. So thanks, Deepa, for fielding questions online, and for Alita doing the timing, and for obviously Matt sorting out all the technical stuff that I don't really know about. Thanks very much to the industry partners for any of this work, and for participants, and also obviously to the supervisors, without whom you could not do your work. And we thanks very much to the Ag Institute for coming to talk to us, but also for including these guys in the running for the Honours Seminars Awards. So thanks very much, and we'll see you again in October.